Thank you so much, Kevin, for this introduction. And I'm really grateful to the Ikeda Center for inviting me to present at this forum today, and also for all of your presence here. Also for those who are joining us online, welcome. And as Kevin mentioned, over the years, the talks at the center that I've been coming to and the books that the center has published, especially on the dialogues between Daisaku Ikeda and the world thinkers, have encouraged me immensely and filled me with hope about the future of the world. And I'm confident that today again, as fellow travelers on this journey, together we will engage, inspire, and gain a deeper understanding about this important concept of dignity. So my focus today is on questions dealing with dignity as an action. What is active dignity? What is doing dignity? What does the process of manifesting dignity look like? And most important, what does the other have to do with this act of dignity? I draw for this discussion from my personal experience with conflict, my research and work in the field of peace and conflict since 2001 with youth and adults in protracted conflict zones, primarily in South Asia and the Middle East, and Daisaku Ikeda's philosophy of peace. I'd like to start with these words from Ikeda from his 2004 peace proposal titled Inner Transformation, Creating a Groundswell of Peace. He says, quote, "Self requires the existence of the other. We cannot engage with others in an effective and productive manner if we lack the inner tension, the will and spiritual energy to guide and control our emotions. It is by recognizing that which is different from us and external to ourselves, sensing the resistance it offers, that we are inspired to exercise the self-mastery that brings our humanity to fruition. To lose sight of the other is thus to undermine our full experience of self." Unquote. These words have served as a foundation for my own exploration of dignity between self and other in the context of conflicts, and would provide us an excellent framework for the conversation today. So bear with me as I'd like to set up some conceptual understanding of how I look at dignity and the other before I share my own experiences and the model of dignity in action. I want to start by looking at the definition of dignity. The dictionary meaning of dignity is stated as the state of quality of being worthy of honor or respect. References to dignity are found in various religious traditions, traditional, national, and international resolutions and declarations, as Kevin mentioned, like the UN Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And dignity as a concept has been adopted globally across various disciplines, education, medicine, business, environment, development, and others. One could say that dignity as a value has a universal acceptance compared to none other. However, there is no explicit definition of dignity in any of these documents where it has been used. Dignity has largely been understood, again, as it was mentioned earlier, in abstraction as a condition, or as Donna Hicks defines it, as a birthright. Nonetheless, there has always been an understanding about what dignity looks like. So just to check with you here, give me a hands, like raise your hands if you would agree that if you saw dignity somewhere in action or its violation, you would recognize it. Would you? Yeah, so I think we would all agree that the state of dignity is recognized in its doing, when it is affirmed or when it's infringed upon. It is in the experience that we recognize dignity, in our actions and behaviors as human beings. So talking about the other, I'm going to present two others. To make a distinction, I call one the other with a small o, and the second the other with the uppercase, the larger O. The small o other is the opposite of I or we. It has been defined as that which is different or distinct from us in personality, beliefs, nationality, race, culture, religion, languages, etc. In fact, these differences with the small o other are often used in what we know as othering, to encourage a sense of belonging with those who are like us, and at the same time create conflicts and divisions with those who are different. In your list that you created, you might think about the small other as those things about others that offend you. That could be one example. The second kind of other, the other with the uppercase O, the bigger O, I call the other within. In your list, these are the things that you might think about yourself that offend others. The big O other has also existed as long as the self has. To paraphrase Jung, he says, this other is a real man or woman who actually thinks, does, feels, and desires all the things that are despicable. This big O other is in all of us. It is our archetypal Goliath. So now coming to the question of the role of these two others in manifesting dignity. We would all agree that it is easier to affirm the dignity of those who are like us. If I had a conversation with Kevin or Taylor, I probably would have not much disagreement, and I think the dignity would be a given in those situations. And I won't even probably think about it. The challenge to demonstrating dignity, however, appears when we come into contact with the small o other, those who are different from us, particularly those who oppose us in our beliefs and our understanding of self. These interactions with the small o other create a dissonance, and it calls forth from within the other with the uppercase O, the feelings of avoidance, unwillingness to engage, of maintaining our own point of view while proving the other wrong, and even maybe sometimes to inflict harm on the other. Hence, the small o other outside us serves as a mirror to reflect on the big O other, the feelings within us. And of course, this presents a moment of choice. So we can give in to these feelings and act out of fear, contempt, and a desire to demean or belittle those whom we are offended by, or we can recognize the feelings in us and challenge them, while creatively envisioning possibilities of including the other that exists outside in our consciousness. On reflecting back on the quote that I started with in the beginning, it is when we choose to do the latter that we honor the full humanity in ourself and the other, and invite dignity to the table. Self and other are hence inextricably linked, and neither can bring forth dignity by excluding the other. They are interdependent in the journey not to act from a place of dignity. They have to be together. Without this engagement between self and other, dignity remains an abstract concept. So I'd like to share my own personal experience from this journey with conflict that I've had. I was born and brought up in the north of India, and the India-Pakistan conflict was a big part of my growing up experience. My grandparents and parents had fled to India as refugees from what is now present-day Pakistan during the 1947 partition of British India. The event of partition was marked by violence between Hindus and Sikhs on one side and the Muslims on the other. Communities that had once lived together sought to kill each other. It is estimated that 12 million people were displaced and more than 1 million lost their lives during that process. I constantly heard accounts from my grandmother about the way partition had forever altered the history, our family's history. When they shared stories of loss of loved ones to heinous acts of violence and their experience of hunger and poverty as refugees in a new land, their feelings of pain and anger for the other were palpable. For my family, the other, Pakistan and its people who were there, were the enemy who had brought the suffering upon us. In all of these conversations about partition, the Pakistanis, the other, were always demonized. I never heard their side of the story. The feelings of hatred and mistrust for the other were further fueled and justified by messages in the media. The Bollywood films were really good at that. The history that we were taught in our schools, and the minimal interactions between the two peoples due to closed borders. Then in 1984, after the assassination of Indira Gandhi, who was the prime minister at that time, by her Sikh guard, riots broke out in Delhi against the Sikhs. I was living in Delhi at that time and witnessed attacks on our Sikh neighbors. Many innocent Sikhs were brutally massacred in these riots. 8 years later, in December 1992, when I was in Mumbai, an incident triggered the Mumbai riots against the Muslims. I saw streets and homes where Muslims lived set on fire by Hindu mobs. This time, it was the Muslims who came under attack. Both these incidents impacted me deeply, and I grappled with the question about the other and about how to transform the hatred and violence to peace. I was introduced at this point to a poem that Daisaku Ikeda wrote in response to the 1992 LA riots titled "The Son of Jiyu Over a New Land." In the poem, Ikeda talks about transcending differences of race, ethnicity, and religion, and encourages us to seek what he calls the primordial roots of humankind, or what we might call dignity. These true roots, he says, are the proof of our humanity. I was deeply inspired by these words, and this became the starting point of my 20 years journey in the field of peace and conflict. In 1995, I moved to the US and met someone from across the borders for the first time. Anila Asgar was from Pakistan, a graduate student like me. Was this the enemy that I had been warned about? We looked similar, enjoyed the same kind of food, and even the movies, and spoke the same language. In this third space, it felt like I was meeting someone from back home, until we started talking about our histories, religion, politics, and partition. These conversations produced feelings of discomfort and frustration in both of us. We both felt the need to defend our country and to convince the other that our respective version of history was the only correct one. According to Anila, India was the perpetrator of violence on her people, and her people were the victims. Of course, I felt the opposite. As we continued to dialogue about these difficult issues, I became aware of the voices in my own head, the big O's that challenged whatever Anila said and prevented me from fully listening to her. I had to engage in an inner dialogue with myself. Continuing to meet with Anila and talk to her gave me the courage to examine my tacit assumptions about the other side in the hope that I could understand them. It meant transforming hatred and revenge to a willingness to perceive the profound connection that I share with the other. I realized that just as our communities had needed each other to sustain the conflict, we also need each other to make peace. Through this process, our friendship deepened, along with our mutual passion to work for peace between our two countries. This became our compass during the difficult conversations. Through these intensely challenging exchanges, we were able to jointly write a new narrative of peace, a narrative which acknowledged that there were perpetrators and victims on both sides. Both sides had suffered loss of life and dignity. We started writing together about creating a joint vision of peace and conducting dialogues with women and youth from India and Pakistan who were here in the region. Either they would be college students or women who we knew. Through these efforts, we creatively transformed our perception of partition from an event of collective violence that had divided us and our communities to an opportunity to reconnect with each other in a new way and affirm our dignity. My own journey of working together with the other gave me immense hope in the possibilities that exist when the human heart and mind are transformed. I was convinced about the role that education can play towards this. This conviction became the cornerstone for my teaching and my research and practice with youth and educators from countries that have been engaged in long-term conflicts. I got involved in a program as Kevin mentioned. It's called the Seeds of Peace program. It brings youth and educators from conflicting countries together for a 6-week camp in Maine. In their time together, while the youth engage in camp activities of fun and games, they also get skills and have structured spaces every day to have meaningful dialogues with each other about issues of conflict between their countries. In the process, I have witnessed the frustration of these youth about the lack of opportunities and spaces for meeting with the other side, and their anger at the larger systems that perpetuate prejudices and divisions between them. At the same time, I've also been inspired to see their willingness, curiosity, and honesty with which they engage with each other. In the face of opposition from their families, teachers, and communities, they courageously continue their friendships even after they return home. When face-to-face interactions become impossible, they support and encourage each other online. Together, they grapple with the insidious nature of biases within themselves and outside, biases that encroach the dignity of life on both sides of the border. I remember one time, after returning home, one of the students very enthusiastically presented about his camp experience at school and how he had made friends with the other side. He was strictly told by his teachers to forget what he learned in camp and to focus on what he was being taught at school. He promptly emailed his friend on the other side, sharing what had happened in his school, to which his friend said, "Don't worry, I have experienced the same in my school, but we will continue to do what we have to do. They can't stop us from talking to each other." This, for me, is self and other working together to bring dignity into action. Reflecting on my experiences on the dynamics between self and other in different conflict contexts, I would like to offer a model of dignity in action. This model draws on Daisaku Ikeda's 3 elements of global citizenship that he presented at Teachers College in 1996. The first element, he says, is the wisdom to perceive the interconnectedness of all life and living. The second, the courage not to fear or deny difference. And the third, the compassion to maintain an imaginative empathy. I call this the WISE model. W for willingness to engage, dialogue, and learn from difference. I for an imagination to think of possibilities. S for self-transformation. And E for engagement through action. They're not necessarily in the same order, but it was just so easy to remember, like WISE, so that's how I kept it. These 4 elements, I believe, are foundational to any work between self and other. Without these, any skill or strategy to address violation of dignity is only working on the surface level and not addressing the root causes. I do want to clarify here that in situations where there is continuing violence and a marked power difference between individuals or groups, stopping the violence and acknowledgement must be part of the process. I'd like us to shift gears now a little bit and bring our conversations back to our personal lives. I'd like you to take a moment to think of someone you're feeling disconnected with, and don't tell me you don't have somebody. We all have that someone. So it could be somebody in your home, family, somebody you're not looking forward to seeing on Thanksgiving. Maybe a colleague at work you've been avoiding, somebody in your community, or maybe it's another group. So just take a moment to think of someone who you might be thinking of as a disconnect right now. And as I talk about these 4 elements that I'm going to share with you, I invite you to think about how you could apply these to your own situation. So let me briefly explain what I mean by each of these. Willingness. By willingness, I mean the openness to be curious about the other, to want to get to know the other's story, to dialogue with the other. So recently, I was at a workshop with community builders from various countries, and there were 2 mothers in the group. One was a Palestinian mother, and the other was an Israeli mother. And the Palestinian mother's neighborhood had been bombed last year in the bombings in the summertime, and the Israeli mother's 19-year-old son had fought that war. So both had come to this platform with a willingness to hear the other's story. When they shared their personal stories, They cried and hugged each other as they realized that they both lived with a constant fear of losing their child. It was not about which side is right. What united them at that moment was mother's plea for peace, grounded in their willingness to dialogue with each other. Imagination, the second principle. By this, I mean the creativity to envision possibilities where none exist. This kind of imagination is not naive idealism, neither is it constrained by reality. It is in the spirit of what Elise Boulding called imagining the future. It is based on a confidence and optimism to create value for peace in any situation. A vision that pushes us to ask ourselves, what else can I do? Which brings us to the third element, self-transformation. Each of these four elements essentially starts from the self. Self-transformation for me is at the core of dignity in action. This is the ability to confront those areas in our life that come in the way of affirming dignity of ourself and the other. These are those insidious voices in our head that justify demeaning, ignoring, or avoiding the other. The voices that say they deserve to be treated badly, or they will never change, or I don't want to deal with them, or I don't think he or she is capable of anything better. By challenging these voices, transforming ourselves, and doing the unexpected of acknowledging the other, dignity of self and other is restored. Here I'm reminded of the words by Ikeda from his book, The Human Revolution, where he states, quote, "A great inner revolution in just a single individual will help achieve a change in the destiny of a nation and further will cause a change in the destiny of humankind," unquote. The last element is engagement. I define this as engagement through action. Action has the power to affirm or violate dignity, bringing us back to where we started, our behavior as human beings. There are many examples that we see every day of such actions. I want to share some with you from my own experience with these young people I've been working with. So one of the Pakistani youngsters I worked with, this was in 2001. He was at that time, I believe, 16 or 17 years old when he came to camp. And he was the whole process was very intense for him to share the histories, and he left very confused. But he continued to keep the engagement with the other side, with children from India. And just 2 years ago, he has launched his own nonprofit called the History Project, where he's put together textbook contents in both the histories about incidents which were the same but are being taught differently in one new history textbook. And he is sharing this with teachers on both sides of the borders. There's another young girl from India. So when they were having these challenges of how do we meet the other side because the borders are closed, getting visas is a Herculean task. This young girl set up a dialogue group online for young people to come and interact with each other and become a platform of getting to know each other. And just recently, in fact, just the beginning of this year, she started what she calls like a certificate program of knowing the other side. So you have these 8 weeks of sessions where online you get to know about different aspects, and she teams them up and they get to talk online. So much as the governments have tried to put these young people keep coming up with these amazing creative ideas to say, okay, we find another way to stay in touch with each other. So I think for me, that has been a constant inspiration. And what I find is it really comes down to starting where we are, at this point. So like we say many times, right in front, who is in front of us, and in the way that makes meaning for us. And when we feel the impulse to act out of hate and contempt for the other, can we pause and ask ourselves these questions? What is guiding my action? What will be the consequence of my action? Is my action creating value for peace? Is it based on affirming the dignity of life? So the next generation is watching us on what we set as our moral compass. It is critical that our actions are based on upholding dignity. I'd like to end with these words from Daisaku Ikeda from his 2013 peace proposal, which Taylor shared some of the words from and is also in the flyer of this event if you haven't read it. He says, quote, "The inherent dignity of life does not manifest in isolation. Rather, it is through our active engagement with others that their unique and irreplaceable nature becomes evident. At the same time, the determination to protect that dignity against all incursions adorns and brings forth the luster of our own lives." Thank you very much.